The following video contains spoilers for all 3 seasons of Dark, Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, Season 1 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 6 of Game of Thrones, the Time Traveler's Wife book and HBO series, the entirety of the Attack on Titan anime and manga, and briefly, Dune Messiah and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Big thanks to Braden Newman for all his suggestions and being a great springboard for ideas. Like, subscribe, share, send me a super chat, buy my book. These actions have all been predetermined by the timeline. Resistance is futile.
The past is written in stone. The future isn't. Some of us struggle to accept both of these truths, wallowing in what ifs and it would have beens, while prematurely convincing ourselves that our futures have already been forged by our past mistakes. The temptation to fantasize about a world where our lives played out differently is strong, especially for those of us who haven't come close to where we hope to be. But how much more tempting? How overwhelmingly addictive would this thought process be if we thought we may be able to literally change the past? How long would it take to give up in despair, then find that despair holds no solace, if we knew every detail of our futures but were powerless to change a thing?
If we try to do anything different, we will fail every time. Whatever happened, happened.
Infallible prophecy has been used as a plot point for millennia. The ancient Greeks in particular focused heavily on the preordained destinies of their characters, usually with a twist of poetic irony. The hero will be granted a map of their future, attempt to circumvent any associated tragedies, and then inadvertently cause said tragedies to occur. Most famously, after being told he would slay his own father and marry his own mother, Oedipus's journey to avoid this dark fate led him to kill a stranger and wed a queen, who were naturally revealed to be his biological parents.
From what house? Do not ask any more, master, for the love of God. Do not ask if I have to question you again.
The hubris to defy the gods may lead to disastrous consequences, but the hubris to try outsmarting the future will lead to a rude awakening. The first season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds includes an element of Delphic prophecy as Christopher Pike struggles to contend with his own dark future. He has seen that his current path will lead to terrible injury and paralysis, and every day he is forced to continue on as normal. Although Pike ultimately decides not to prevent his fate, the fact that he could have done so shows that his vision wasn't as unchangeable as the supernatural prophecies of the Greek oracles, and the appearance of an alternate future Pike proves that this particular incarnation of Star Trek operates on a linear timeline. While other linear time travel stories such as Steins Gate and 11/22/63 have dealt with self-correcting universes that make changing the past difficult, the rare, consistently cyclical timeline implies such impotent despair that Oedipus would count himself lucky. The 1995 sci-fi thriller 12 Monkeys utilizes a cyclical timeline in which absolutely nothing can be changed by travel to the past. Those who remain in the post-apocalyptic future are aware of this and use time travel not to prevent the pandemic that ravaged their world, but to gain knowledge of its biology and outbreak to help combat the disease in their present. Their less than scientifically minded agent James Cole doesn't quite understand the implications of a cyclical timeline and holds out hope that he can change certain events in the past.
It's okay! We're insane! We're crazy!
The choices he makes naturally lead to the outbreak of the pandemic itself and ultimately guide him to being gunned down in front of his younger self, an event that has haunted his dreams since he experienced it from the other end of his life. The cyclical nature of 12 Monkeys is further proven when Cole's friend Dr. Rowley leaves a voicemail warning of the coming pandemic, the same message Cole had previously heard in the future. Although it was his direct involvement that led to this voicemail, it had already been made before he even went back in time, just as he had always been gunned down in the airport and he had always helped cause the pandemic. In fact, it was Cole's lack of discretion that not only led to the creation of the virus, but to the naming of the eponymous Army of the 12 Monkeys. Cole name-dropping the army and thus inspiring its name to begin with is an example of the infamous bootstrap paradox, or ontological loop, in which something only exists because it always existed, famously exemplified in The Terminator when the T-800's mission to kill John Connor's mother indirectly led to his very conception. While James Cole may not have fully understood his inability to change the past until his dying moments, 12 Monkeys pontificates on the existential dread of cyclical timelines by tying it thematically to the Greek legend of Cassandra, a woman who was gifted with unavoidable prophecies, yet cursed to never be believed. While the Cassandra analogy is used for such disparate topics as ignorance of women's issues and public ridicule of climate activists, the Cassandra Complex of 12 Monkeys refers to a condition by which one compartmentalizes their trauma into a fictional future disaster that they believe they must prevent. This iteration of the Cassandra Complex is naturally at the heart of the movie's plot and Cole's arc, given that Dr. Raleigh refuses to believe he is from the future, but to put a finer point on it, Raleigh's idea of the Cassandra Complex is itself dismissive in the same way as those who didn't believe Cassandra's prophecies. The World War I soldier she highlights as an example of the psychological affliction was in fact a time traveler who hoped he could prevent the future pandemic, but was not believed during the war or by present-day psychologists. Ironically, Raleigh's theory highlights the impotence to prevent future events that one believes are predetermined, but ignores the more prevalent parallel to the original Cassandra that she and the rest of the scientific world partake in. The Cassandra Complex, as Dr. Raleigh explains, is highlighted by
the agony of foreknowledge combined with the impotence to do anything about it.
And nowhere is this agony more fully portrayed than in Netflix's time travel drama Dark. The series follows the small town of Vinden, whose residents are unknowingly caught in a complex rhizome of cyclical paradoxes, woven by nearly every major character as they travel back and forth throughout their town's history and propagate their own families through unintentional incest. Protagonist Jonas Conwald was born to a simple pair of parents, but little did any of them know that, due to their future actions in the past, Jonas's mother was also his great-great-great-great-grandmother, and his grandfather was also his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. Over the course of the series, as the characters move back and forth through the timeline and cause events that would always have happened, Jonas discovers that he will one day become the Machiavellian schemer Adam, whose nihilistic tendencies and horrific facial scarring couldn't be any further from the innocent teenager recovering from his father's death. Although Jonas tries over and over to prevent his transformation into Adam, he is worn down over the course of his travels. He never suddenly decides to side with Adam, much less to become him, but subtle changes in his attitude and perspective lead him down the same path Adam remembers traveling when he was Jonas. Unlike with Captain Pike, the presence of future Jonas cannot change anything. There is no first or second run-through of their timeline as there would be in a linear world. Jonas will always become Adam, and Adam will always remember meeting Adam when he was Jonas. Dark more than lives up to its name in its exploration of determinism and free will. After realizing that he cannot prevent anything that has already been established within the knot of conflicting timelines, Jonas decides to take the quickest way out, ending his own misery and preventing Adam from ever existing. He tries to hang himself, but is saved by an associate. He tries to shoot himself in the head, but the gun fires blanks until it is no longer pointing at Jonas. This isn't some coincidence, and it isn't a higher power stepping down to save Jonas's life. Jonas simply cannot die, as his older self has already been seen to exist. In a cyclical timeline, no one can go back and kill someone who is still alive in the present. And anyone who is observed to exist in the future becomes functionally immortal, their continued life and every step of their journey already determined through a temporal anthropic principle. Unlike Oedipus and James Cole, Jonas Conwald has had any ounce of hope beaten out of him. His future is dark, his future is set in stone, and he cannot find relief, even in death. Even if he were to give up completely, lay catatonic on the floor and refuse to move, something or someone would always convince him to take the actions required for him to become Adam, because Adam would have gone through the same.
Alles im Leben verläuft in Zyklen. Auf Sonnenuntergang folgt Sonnenaufgang. Wieder und wieder.
This timeline-mandated immortality was referenced in Douglas Adams' nominally cyclical Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which Arthur Dent hears about a certain event in his future and realizes he cannot die. Unfortunately for Arthur, overconfidence in his immortality leads him to unwittingly participate in the prophesied event, at which point he is immediately killed. This same concept is briefly touched on in The Time Traveler's Wife, in which inadvertent Tempanaut Henry Detamble knows he cannot die, at least until he reaches the oldest age at which he has met himself. But unlike Jonas and Arthur, Henry doesn't live in an outlandish sci-fi world. His Vonnegut-esque time-skipping edition is the impetus for a romance novel, and he generally tries to lead a normal life. Throughout the novel, Henry and the titular Claire make nominal attempts to alter the timeline, but always fail, and Henry doesn't waste time waxing existential about his condition. He knows he can't change the past he has experienced or the future he has witnessed, but he knows his life story will still be guided by his own decisions. While Henry has come to accept this, Claire is less willing. In the HBO adaptation, Claire discovers that she is Henry's side piece, and her first reaction is to cut ties with him. She has seen evidence that they will someday be married, and she knows deep down that she is capable of forgiving him. But in that moment, she doesn't want to believe that the future is set in stone, and even less so, that she will personally change her mind. She will come to love and eventually marry Henry of her own accord, but the Cassandra Complex has stolen any feeling of agency, and Claire must feel like a puppet of the timeline itself. While characters such as Christopher Pike and Paul Atreides have used visions of the future to potentially alter the timeline, other characters have utilized such powers to participate in a self-fulfilling cycle. When Brandon Stark spoke to a younger version of his father, he realized that the power of the three-eyed raven allowed him to not only view the past, but to affect it. He later discovered that while he could make himself known in the past, he couldn't change the future, as his warging into a past version of Hodor created the Hodor we had known all along. While Game of Thrones neglected to delve into the psychology of prophecy and time travel, the slack was taken up by Hajime Isayama's massively popular Attack on Titan, whose biggest twist was admittedly lifted straight from Bran Stark. In a jaw-dropping moment that revealed not only the series' time travel elements, but also the depth of Eren Yeager's villain arc, Eren speaks directly to his dead father in a vision of the past. Unlike when Bran spoke to Ned, this isn't an ambiguous moment. It is revealed that Eren and his father before him possessed the ability to see into the future, and that it was Eren's future memories of the past that inspired his father to commit the horrendous acts that not only jump-started the events of Attack on Titan itself, but led directly to the fulfillment of Eren's genocidal master plan. Eren's communication with his father directly allowed him to steal the power of the Founding Titan, which in turn allowed him to cherry-pick the memories he sent back in time, manipulating his father into carrying out his will. In using this power, Eren has not actually changed the future. Like Jonas and Adam, he has simply hit all the story beats of the timeline, and done so willingly. All of this has been in the service of starting the Rumbling, an apocalyptic event that will destroy Eren's enemies at the cost of the human race. Like Henry Detamble, Eren is motivated by his own feelings, but like Jonas Conwald, he knows he would be unable to prevent the Rumbling if he wanted to. Given that the timeline has always been headed towards fulfilling Eren's plans, the Cassandra Complex is suffered not by Eren, but by his father, an unwilling participant in genocide. A slave to the timeline. Since Eren and his father have already witnessed the Rumbling through their precognition, the Rumbling will always take place. Jonas Conwald will always become a scarred supervillain who believes the path to peace is genocide, and Eren Yeager will always become a demonic representation of his own hatred who believes the same thing. Eren's characterization in the final issue and episode of Attack on Titan has been the subject of serious fan scrutiny, with many wondering how the hardened fascist dictator they had come to know ended up breaking down in tears over his will-they-won't-they relationship with his stepsister, while in the process of slaughtering the vast majority of the human race. But whether this character beat was ill-advised, the important part for our purposes is that Eren admits he is no longer sure of his own motivations. Gaining the power of the 2,000-year-old Founding Titan has muddled his brain, showing him exactly when and how the Rumbling will be stopped, and what will be left of the world. Despite his apparent convictions throughout the series, Eren admits that he has extrapolated on dozens of different paths he could have taken. Whether this was before or after he started the Rumbling is unclear, but Eren explains that he couldn't have prevented his own genocide if he wanted to. Confused and distraught, all Eren could do was continue living out the timeline. In his words, to keep moving forward, both literally and figuratively. A fitting statement, given that the Japanese name of Eren's Titan form, and the series itself, translates to the Advancing Giant. The Cassandra Complex has affected Eren, as it had his father. Like Jonas Conwald, he is forced to accept that he himself brought about the dark future he has seen, but unlike Jonas, he is at the end of his story. Aaron may have avoided the Cassandra Complex longer than Jonas, as he stood by his convictions from the beginning to nearly the end, but Adam is eventually relieved to find an alternative to omnicide, while Aaron has to die knowing that he has mercilessly killed billions, and that his own convictions are as much to blame as the rigid flow of time. Aaron calls himself a slave to freedom, but in reality he is a slave to the timeline. All of us are. James Cole, Jonas Conwald, Henry Detamble, Aaron Yeager, none of these characters were able to change one instant of the past. But neither are we. Traveling back along a cyclical timeline, struggling to change events while knowing you have always failed and always will fail, essentially amounts to the impotent misery we feel when considering what we could and should have done differently. These characters can only be pitied, as they have been instilled with a torturous hope and doomed to keep pushing themselves against reality itself, their goals always remaining just out of reach. We in the real world have avoided this poisonous gift. We may struggle with accepting that we cannot change the past, but at least we will never be duped into believing we can. As all these fictional characters discovered, the curse of cyclical time travel is not only that they cannot change the past, but that they can't change the future either. And technically, neither can we. No amount of willpower or random acts can change a single detail of the future that our descendants will have always looked back on. We are slaves to the timeline. Without literal time travel, nothing we do will ever differentiate from what we always would have done. Yet in this way, we are more free than any of these characters, and determinism does not negate free will. We have the power to shape our own futures, based on our convictions and personal motivations, and the fact that we can't change what always would have happened essentially amounts to nothing. There is no Cassandra Complex in reality, at least not in the way it's represented in these stories. We can predict certain eventualities with varying degrees of accuracy, but with no concrete evidence of future events, there is nothing to keep us trying for the best possible outcome.
How does it feel? How does it feel? Normal.
Even with this foreknowledge, Henry Detamble never surrendered to the Cassandra Complex. Maybe his reality was easier to accept given that it didn't involve a descent into mass murder, but either way he understood that his life was guided by his own decisions, regardless of the predetermined outcome. This philosophy would naturally be more difficult for Jonas Conwald to accept. Like Claire Abshire, his acknowledgement of Adam is an admission that, with no influence from higher powers, he will one day evolve into an omnicidal cult leader. But no matter how dark his future, this was still his own decision. The seed of Adam always existed in Jonas, as the spirit of a world killer existed within Aaron. If neither of them had what it took to destroy the world, then this eventuality would not have been predetermined by the timeline. Why do those who believe in predestination bother living a righteous life on Earth? Is it just to prove to others that they have already been chosen to sit at the right hand of God? If we accept the view on determinism that I've laid out here, does it even matter to a hypothetical higher power whether we live by their rules? According to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, quote, "To God, all moments of time are present in their immediacy. When, therefore, he establishes his eternal plan of predestination, he includes in it each person's free response to his grace." From this perspective, we have all been set on a course for heaven or hell, but only because God is outside of time and has already considered all the choices we will make of our own free will. For those who base their morality on belief in a God, this post-death judgment may fill the same role as a prophecy, a determinate future moment at which all of our actions are taken into account. For those who don't believe in God and are able to freely choose our own paths regardless of determinism, consider the role of God filled by our future selves or our progeny. We have been allowed the gift of hope, and we must use that hope to forge a path that leads to an outcome that we would be happy to hear about in a prophecy. With no time travel, no prophecies, and no handbooks guiding our way to the future, we as individuals can never know if our plans will succeed. But once we accept that we can never change the past, we can allow ourselves to realize that our futures are still ahead of us, and our path to those futures begins this very moment. The trajectories of our lives are dependent on our own wills, and our futures become our presents, become our pasts as we go through life like Schrodinger's cat. Our actions won't be irreversible until they're no longer hypothetical. Your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one.
Rude Awakening. The first season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds includes an elephant. He has seen that his current path will lead to terrible injury